All right. Welcome, Karina, and welcome, Huajun. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm recording this session for folks who may not be able to join us and can watch it later. So my name is Chai Lee, and I run the Boards and Commissions Leadership Institute. Thanks for taking the time to join me and learn more about the program today. Now, if the clicker, there we go. Um, we'll do a quick introduction. If we can go around and if you please say your name, who you identify as your community, and how did you hear about the program, and what's one dream you have for equity in our region. I'll start first. My name is Chai Lee. My community would be people of color and the greater Twin Cities community, and also in particular my Hmong community. Um, I actually heard about the BCLI program uh, 11 years ago when Terry Tao, my predecessor, was laying the groundwork for the program. She was doing research and she actually reached out to different government staff and community members and stakeholders to ensure that if she created the BCLI here, that there would be a need, a demand, and that the community would want it, and that it was not replicating another project. And so at the time I worked for Mayor Chris Coleman and I handled boards and commissions appointments. And so she actually reached out and we had a one-on-one coffee. And that's the first time I heard about it in 2011. And my dream for greater equity in our region would be to close the gap on homelessness and housing insecurity and the disparities that we have in the state of Minnesota. Karina, do you want to go first or next?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. My name is Karina Kelton-Marin. I serve the Latino community. I'm Latina. And I heard about this opportunity from Liliana Delon Gomez, who works for Hennepin County Public Health. She does amazing work, and she passed along this opportunity, which I think is awesome. Equity is so important, and in every area, you know, the services any organization provides. It's if we can make them more equity, more people have access, have access to them. And I think health equity is really, really important to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Huajun?
Yep. My name is Huajun Kim. I use she, her pronouns. The community that I identify with is sort of Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, immigrant, LGBTQ folks that are sort of changing the landscape of movement building here in the Twin Cities. I heard about the BCLI, trying to think, 5 years ago, some odd years ago. I was in their 4th cohort, and I heard about it just by Googling. To be honest, I was looking for something more, wondering where the spaces of power were, who was making decisions, and just found the BCLI by a lot of luck and was really grateful. The dream that I have for equity in our region is probably education equity. We have a lot of education inequities, and I think that we should fully fund our schools.
All right, thanks to you both. Here's a quick primer on who and what Nexus is. 18 years ago, Nexus was formed to deal with community issues around the lack of investment in communities of color. Around that time, the east side of St. Paul and the South Minneapolis neighborhoods around Lake Street and Payne, Phelan Lake areas, we're seeing anchor institutions leave, like big corporations. And in the St. Paul context, it was like Maytag and 3M. And so there was an opportunity to remake the neighborhood in the image of the neighborhood that would be more reflective of who lived there. And community wanted to ensure that community wealth was kept in the neighborhood so that people of color who lived and worked there could maintain houses and jobs in the area. And so we were created to convene partners, stakeholders, developers, and to kind of revitalize these areas. And so Nexus started out as a very much place-based organization. And if you're familiar with the Midtown Global Market, for example, and Hope Community, Nexus was able to convene to bring the partners and make those two places exist and come to fruition. We have 3 buckets of work that we call the 3 ships: authorship, ownership, and leadership. In the authorship bucket, we have our Community Engagement Institute. They're wonderful folks who offer amazing trainings for communities on community engagement. And then in the ownership bucket, we have staff working to build community wealth and to help transform the capitalist landscape, and, for example, help preserve businesses by helping folks convert their businesses to worker ownership models and cooperatives. And then the leadership bucket, that's where the BCLI program lives, and we build capacity of leaders throughout the metro area and throughout the state. And we're an intermediary, so that means that not in addition to being a nonprofit, we also take money from philanthropy and we grant it out into the community. So we, over the last 18 years, we have given out over $13 million to other nonprofits in the community. The BCLI is actually a replication project or program. The originator is a BIPOC-led environmental justice organization in Oakland. They're called Urban Habitat. They've been around over 20 years, and in 2009, they kind of started the BCLI. If you're familiar with the California political climate, they are more about issues campaigns in California. So things like referendum votes, things like that. And so in 2009, while they were working on issues campaigns in the neighborhood in the Bay Area, they realized they were coming up against forces that were stymieing or stalling or obstructing some of their policy goals. And they realized that a lot of these levers or places of power were boards and committees and commissions. And they didn't always reflect the communities that they operated in. And so they asked themselves, is there a program that would train people of color who want to get on publicly appointed boards and commissions? And in doing the research, they realized there was no such program, and they realized that we'd have to do it ourselves. And so they created the BCLI. And then 3 years later, my predecessor, Terry, reached out and replicated the program with an MOU. And so there's an annual summit of the BCLI programs across the nation in Oakland every summer. And we are their second replication site. Over the years, there have been many iterations across the country, but the current active sites are, in addition to the Bay, Liberty Hill, Los Angeles, Fresno, Merced, Seattle, Puget Sound, Houston, San Antonio, Baltimore, and Nashville. And there used to be Michigan and Hawaii, and they dropped off. There's also Sacramento and San Diego. And so we're one of a half dozen sites of the BCLI across the country. The model is we are a cohort model. We train, we place, and connect people through our relationships, through advocacy. It's a 7-month leadership program. We kick off in October and we end in March with a formal graduation in April. What Nexus believes about equality and equity is this very powerful graphic here in this quote that equality means everyone gets a pair of shoes. Equity means everyone gets a pair of shoes that fit. And in this beautiful graphic, you see a demonstration that just everyone getting the same kind of step stool doesn't mean that everyone can still reach the same height. And that's what Nexus believes about equity versus equality, and that's the vantage point from which we operate. And what we mean by leadership is that everyone has the potential to be a leader and can be a leader. and that leadership is not innate, or that's something that you earn or formally have to train for, and that everyone in community can be seen and should be seen as a leader, and that their leadership should be fostered and to be able to grow. And in the work that we do, we target seats. So in the application form, you'll see that there are targeted seats. And that's because we want our folks to be having seats at the table where their voices really matter, and that the seats are powerful, and that they're not just token Black and brown bodies, or, you know, people who represent disadvantaged or low wealth backgrounds, that they're not just a token person, that their voice is really valued. And what exactly do boards and commissions do, and why do we target them? Boards and commissions are really a kind of a very quiet, almost secret lever of power in government that most people don't realize exists or don't know about and don't really appreciate. And you see here listed, depending on each board and commission or committee, they have varying degrees of legal and political power. They can review and advise different government units on plans and budgets processes. They can facilitate community input. They can take public comment, research issues, review agencies. They can regulate. They can make actual policies. They can recommend funding. For example, the Transportation Advisory Board of the Met Council advises billions of dollars in spending every 2 years. And the same with certain public health related committees and commissions at the state level. And how does someone advocate for racial equity as a commissioner? You do this by raising awareness about racial and economic inequality, and you voice your perspective either through your lived experience or through an equity lens, and being a voice at the table to bring up these issues and build visibility around your community. This is a very unique leadership program, and that we are basically, you should see the BCLI as a social change tool that happens to be a leadership program. We focus on power and systems. Everyone has assets and is a leader, and we share equitable policies, and we try to affect them at all levels of government. This is from Hwajung's graduation, actually, this picture from the fourth cohort. The cohort model is key to our work. It really brings a cohesive spirit of learning to the fellows and the alumni. And people come from all sorts of backgrounds. Leaders come from government, nonprofit, private sectors. And, you know, whether you work in transit or health or whatever, we take folks from all kinds of backgrounds. The ideal candidate just has to match the residency requirements of the boards in which they target. And they must commit to being a leader on issues of social, racial, and economic justice, and understanding the impact of policy and the role of systems, and have experience in advocacy. And that could be personal or professional. You know, you can have a personal experience being an advocate for your child in the school systems, for example. You don't have to necessarily have to be a registered lobbyist at the Capitol. And you just have to commit to the trainings and to be on a board or commission. This is kind of how the program looks like if you lay it out. The application was open last week, and then it closes the last week of June. Interviews will be done in mid-August, and then folks will be notified in late August, early September, and the cohort begins October. At this point, Nexus is still finalizing its office policies around going back in person or not. And so what I have on the webpage right now is two different calendars. One if we would be in person, and one if it would be on Zoom again. The last 2.5 years, we've been exclusively on Zoom. So we will make a decision on that in the next couple of weeks here. So targeted seats, as I mentioned before, in the application, you'll see that targeting seats is essential to the work because we want you to think about boards that do meaningful work in the community. And so you can pick between 1 and 3 seats or boards that you want to get seated on in the application process. These 5 issue areas are the areas in which we train throughout the curriculum: economic development, health, housing, transit, and workforce development. We don't have education because there's a lot of great partners out there that already advocate and do work around education. This slide is kind of unnecessary, but it just gives you a sample still of the different political geographies of boards placements that we have targeted and were placed fellows and alumni on in the past. At this point, because we have folks on every level of government, whether it's local, regional, or state, this map is now just kind of redundant because we have folks who actually live outside of these cities too, like other suburbs that are not mentioned here that that they've come through the program. But I guess this is just a sampling of the different political geographies to which we have had people placed. We asked folks to be nominated by someone or a institution. It could be an alumni, it could be a faith-based org, it could be a labor union, or other leadership programs. It could be funders, other nonprofits. It could be community leaders and elders, or it could be a unit of government or other grassroots organizations. And each year, mostly over 50% of nominations are made by our alumni network. So I think that is a great testament to the program itself and also to the engagement of the alumni. And so that's really great to see. And if you don't think that you have a relationship with anyone here to nominate you, don't let that turn you away from the application. Contact me directly and I'm happy to work with you to try to link you up with a nominator. So that slide just says what I just said verbally. And then the application process is pretty simple and straightforward. On the application page, you'll see 2 links with these 2 kind of portals. The first portal is for the nominator to upload nomination form or letter and a letter of recommendation. The nomination form is basically a demographic form for the nominator. And then for you as the applicant or the nominee, a similar demographic form for you, your letter of interest, and then a current resume. There's also a full PDF of this if you want to or prefer to print it out and then fill it in and then mail it in as well. The cohort composition is a mixture of folks who are already seated, who have not been seated but are committed to being placed, and folks who are not, or who are just exploring the idea of getting on boards and commissions. Again, the program is 7 months, and the program dates will be more solidified later in the summer. We're a very unique program too, in the sense that we actually give folks a stipend. It's a very modest stipend. It's only $500, and it is mainly to help offset any things that folks might need help with, like maybe it's childcare or transit or transportation. So yeah, that's one of the very thoughtful things that we're conscious about in working in community. These are the different curriculum buckets, if you will, that we train throughout the curriculum: political skills, technical skills, and what we call knowledge integration sessions. So this is just a sampling of the different training modules that we'll have, and this is also not exhaustive. So there's more training modules, but this is just a sampling of the 3 different buckets. And how we get seated, or how we help you get seated, is we help advise you and help you through the application process. If you need any help, we help as staff help you review any materials that would be helpful in your application. And we establish relationships with staff and electeds behind the scenes to be the best advocate we can to help support and place alumni and fellows on boards. And then through the alumni network, we do programming still with alumni, whether that might be professional modules to advance their professional leadership and learnings, or other social events like a social hour, just so alumni can meet across the different cohort years. And here are some of our bragging rights to date. We have 130 alumni, of which 65 or 50% have been placed. And that is the best placement rate of any BCLI program in the country. And this is just a sampling of the different boards and committees on which we have had people placed. And our wonderful alumni here is Huajang, and she has been kind enough to spend a little bit of her time to share her perspective. So Karina, you have a wonderful opportunity to hear directly from Huajang. She came through our fourth cohort, which was 2016, 2017. Yeah, she's gone on to do amazing work and do great things. She worked as this senior aide and policy advisor to the current city council president of St. Paul, Amy Brenmoen, and now she's the executive director of Minnesota Voices. And I'll go ahead and stop talking and have Huajang take it away.
It's longer ago than I thought it was. It just still feels very fresh. Also, I was wearing bow ties then, so that's fun. The only thing that I would just like add as just a quick thought is you are very well fed. So anytime you are at the BCLI, you are well fed, and there's always food to be taken home. And that's really important as we think about asking for time, energy from people, and particularly people of color and culture that are coming from various backgrounds of need, various backgrounds of abilities. That, I mean, food is something like always well fed, which is always appreciated. So I originally Googled the BCLI. It was sort of about like a job that I didn't really love and wasn't being taken seriously, and just sort of was wondering like, you know, where else did these decisions get made? And so my background is in housing. So it was really kind of through a land use perspective that I was like, you know, why did this, you know, there was a house there. How is there like a hair salon there now, right? Like that doesn't make sense to me in my neighborhood. So I just started to ask those questions, and I was connected to my neighborhood district council, which I still serve on today. And it was sort of through the BCLI that I started to understand like these areas of sort of hidden power that you just don't know about, like the zoning committee of the St. Paul Planning Commission. So that was my like really amazing appointment after I went through the BCLI, is I snagged like the creme de la creme appointments in St. Paul, which is the Planning Commission, and served on the zoning committee. And now I can drive around St. Paul and point at the things that I voted on, which is kind of amazing. And it was sort of through this experience of like giving me a more holistic lens of how equity is the theme that kind of binds everything together to ensure that we have like just systems and thriving neighborhoods, and therefore like resilient and like whole people, like we can show up with our whole selves in these systems. The BCLI really gave me just this like way more hands-on holistic lens. In my interview, you know, they sort of ask you where you have the experience and where are you interested in and where you're not interested in. And I remember being like, I'm not interested in transit. And actually, it's like one of the things that I'm most into right now, because they are 4-3ing Rice Street. And now I'm pushing for bike lanes. Like I showed up to those info sessions, right? Push for bike lanes, thinking more about walkable neighborhoods. And so you just start to see how all these things begin to be a little more interconnected and a little more intentional. And so I was therefore like prepared to serve. I'd been on nonprofit boards before, but this really gave me like the leg up to not just like walk in and participate, but like walk in and influence the conversations that were happening, influence votes, influence people. And then sort of because of that, I ended up like on a random Friday afternoon getting a phone call from my council member asking if I'd want to be their legislative aide, and then started writing laws for the state, for the city, which was really incredible. And also during COVID, which was really, there was a lot to do and a lot of people that needed help. And now, since the city, I now am the executive director of Minnesota Voice, and we serve sort of like historically exploited communities, engaging them not just for the ballot box, but to, you know, build their own movement and build their own power within community, kind of where they're at. But really, it was like me going from a dead-end job in 2016, like constantly being overlooked for promotions, to now like running an organization. And I honestly do contribute that like 80% to the BCLI. I give myself a little soft 10, and Chai gets 10% of that, I think, too. So that's kind of like the, not just kind of like the value, but like you can apply these skills in so many different ways. And it also gives you like a language to speak as well, that I think helps people of color navigate power, which is incredibly important, because one of the things that you'll do is you have to go visit a board that you're interested in. And, you know, you report back, and we found out that some boards offered like acronym definitions for anyone that walked in, right? And some don't. So you're sitting there wondering like what the heck they're even talking about, right? So there's even sort of like the exclusivity of language and how you choose to use it and who you choose to use it with. But all these things become very kind of stark and clear. And it also gives you like a network of people that are like doing kind of similar work, and you start to see them pop up in different places that you move through. And so I think the value on the front end is just like this intrinsic value of a leadership program that is unlike anything I've done. And the back half is definitely the alumni network, where you're connected with a bunch of other people that are doing work. So one of the people on the screen is Luis Rangel Morales, and he is now the chair of the St. Paul Planning Commission. So like when I walked in and started to serve, there was another BCLI alum sitting right across from me. And we're like, you know, I see you. So it's the network, like both sort of socially, but also within these structures of power that you get to rely on and use and think about, you know, moving big shit together, which is, I think, one of the best parts. Yeah. So it's kind of like a medium-sized explanation of kind of like my value of this program, but would kind of love to hear if you have any questions about participant experience.
No, I think all of that sounds so awesome. And thank you so much for sharing. And one of the things that's the hardest for me, and especially in interviews, is I know I have the experience of making change, of doing equity, you know, in my work, and, you know, but I don't have that terminology. I don't have, when they ask me like, how do you implement racial equity or how do you use it, you know, toolkits and all these things, and I'm like, oh my God, I know I have this experience and I know I can do this work really well. But when they throw those words in, oh my gosh, my brain goes blank. I don't know what I'm saying, and I know I have the experiences. But yeah, so that I think would be super helpful for me. And yeah, just the network and yeah, like what you're saying, the acronyms and stuff throw people off. They throw me off all the time. And just, yeah, I think for me, it's the wording. They use these super fancy words, and I'm like, when it's really more simple, and I think as a person of color, you see these things, but I don't know, I just feel like the wording and stuff, it's a way to keep certain people in and other people out. It's, you know, that's what hurts me the most in trying to do what I love to do, you know? So
Absolutely. I
Thank you
think
so much.
it's like the engagement of the game. It's like the rules of the game, right? And for some people, it's like theory and whatever. And for other people, it's very much real life. I do think that, you know, you are able to practice in a very safe space.
That's awesome.
Like using the terms, talking about these ideas, and also like hands-on like things like it's a great mix of like lecture style, group work style, like hands-on style, individual, like there's many different ways they have that folks learn in the program. So sort of caters not just to like college, you know, for the most part, you're just sitting there listening to someone taking notes. But in the BCLI, we would have guest speakers that were actually working on something happening right now. And this is
I
the
love
tool
that.
that they were using for their project. So an example was like the Arden Hills, I can't remember what it was, but it was, what
Yeah,
was it?
it was an old armory.
Armory.
Yeah.
And so they were looking at kind of like community engagement uses, needs of the community, right? Using an equitable, they developed an equitable scorecard. And so like we use that. So there's like this it's like a real model that is not used to perpetuate oppression, but one that like includes people and centers the right people. And we got to like test it out. We also did one where like you're negotiating with your fellow cohort members, like you get a little, like you're this type of person, you have this resource, don't give up this thing. This is the thing that you need to get out of this transaction. And how do you negotiate and get what you need, but also like not perpetuate like taking or resource hoarding or like, you know, perpetuating themes of white supremacy out of like the scarcity set. So it very much is like a safe space to practice ideas, even to be challenged. And the last thought that I have that I just absolutely loved is like, there's also like a place in time. Like you start to learn not just where we are now, but how we got here. What are the things that we've been fighting for so long? What are the barriers? Who do you need to have with you if you want to make that change? And I think that like sort of like this is where we are in this moment of time gives us an opportunity to both pause, but provide urgency to sort of like finding the right solutions. And I was in when Trump became president, and like that Saturday, we had an all-day BCLI, and I can't even tell you how meaningful it was to have space to just like, we were just like sobbing. Like I think there was an hour we were all just like talking about our feelings, and there was no one at work even batted an eye. Like I just didn't work the next day, no one said anything, and I worked at a nonprofit, right? And so I think there's a safety in the space and a uniqueness in the way that you get to like test and try your own stuff, and also be challenged by other people that are like-minded, and that just makes you that much sharper when you exit.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah, and Karina, your point about the language is really important, and especially having a shared language to be able to talk about the work and to emphasize the need for changing policies. And that's one of the things that the core model really helps people really learn together, and to have the safe space where we can have these conversations, and to even to come up with the language where we may not have formally learned it or used it in the past, that learning the language of equity in itself is a way to build your toolkit too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, no, this sounds way better than I could have even imagined. So thank you. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah. Thanks, Hojang. All right, so I'll go through a few remaining slides here. If the clicker will work. There we go. As Hojang mentioned, a lot of our evaluations show that the alumni have identified increased leadership and visibility, both in personal and professional capacity, whether that's getting more high profile at work, or more responsibilities, or affecting policy change more directly. For example, alumni Ron Harris, similarly to Huajang, was able to be a high-level policy aide and serve on Minneapolis's Safe and Sick Time Task Force. And go on to, and folks have gone on to work in other local and regional state governments, and even run for office. So Ilhan Omar was in our first cohort, and Holan Hassan was in the, I believe she was in the cohort after Huajang. Or was she yours? Yeah, okay, yeah, she was with Huajang. Yeah, I forget. So yeah, so that's some of the other outcomes that we wanted to highlight. And this is just a reminder of the program dates. So June 27th is the deadline. In mid-August, we'll have interviews, and then the cohort is announced in October or September, and then the program kicks off on October 7th. And if you have any other questions, you can contact me at this contact here. And if you have any other questions for me or Huajang, feel free to ask them now, Karina.
No, I'm good. Thank you very much for sharing your contact. Well, actually, I did have a question about the person who nominates you. Like, they don't have to be or have been part of this program.
No,
correct?
yeah, yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they don't have to have been an alumni.
Okay. Perfect. No, and I think that's it.
Yeah, and on the nomination thing, in the past we have had folks get nominated by their work boss or supervisor because they see this as a professional development tool for them too. And so you could think about that, or if you have other folks in mind, feel free to reach out to them. And if you don't think that you have relationships with anyone who might nominate you, feel free to reach out to me and I can link you up with an alumni or some other community partner.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. No, I think I'm going to reach out to a couple of people to join this too, that I think could be a really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
really
Yeah.
good fit.
Yeah, we can use all the great, the greater the pool of candidates, the better for all of us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, that sounds great. I'm gonna get on it and start the application process. Reach out to a couple of good people that I think would be great for this. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Karina. Let me start recording, and then you can jump off. And then, Huajang, you want to hang back for just a minute to debrief?